because they saw his signs, which he had performed on those who were diseased. Verse 3, and Jesus went up to the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing the great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these might eat? Verse 6. But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Verse 7. Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everyone may have just a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a lad over here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what is this among so many? Verse 10, and Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so that the men sat down in the number of about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves when he had given thanks, and he distributed them to the disciples. And the disciples took those that were sitting down, and likewise the fish, as much as they wanted. So that when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments and 5 barley loaves, which were leftovers from those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, they said, truly this is the prophet that is come into the world. May God add the blessing and reading to his word. Amen. This whole story is prefaced by a very important issue. The people were following the miracle. Let me say that again. I'm going to turn these so I can hear a little bit better. You guys can help me up back there. They were following the miracle that they needed. They knew Jesus could perform a miracle, but they didn't know exactly what they needed him to do till they got there. That happens with us all the time. How many years do we spend following Jesus before we ever need a miracle? Salvation's the first one. We know that's one we can't go without. I needed him the most. I didn't have to look very far. There he was. These people had come because they saw the miracles he performed over in the other part of Galilee. They didn't come because they were invited. They didn't come because there was a special event going on. They didn't come because they were going to get fed. They came because they had a need. The first thing that happens when we find Jesus is he knows what our need is first. He sees the need. Every miracle Jesus performed, he saw the need before they asked for a miracle. Even if they didn't ask, he saw the need. Jesus looked at Philip. He didn't say, how many people are there? He didn't ask, why are they following me? What was his question? What do we have? Is there enough bread? They need food. Their need might have been for healing. They may have had a need for some type of relief from a sickness. They may have needed salvation. But he didn't address that need first. Their immediate need was they're hungry. I've never met a person in this world that's not been hungry at some point. I've been hungry. You've been hungry. This afternoon after church, we all got something to take care of that hunger, no matter what you did. If you made it at home, if you went out to eat somewhere, after church tonight, we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to fill our belly. Why? Because that is one of the primary needs of every person that's living, is to take care of the need of food. Hunger. No one goes without. Jesus didn't overlook the crowd to say, you know what? They'll be all right. What I have for them is better. He saw the crowd. Mark chapter 6, there's a different spin he puts on it. When you get a chance, this is a side note, when you get a chance to look at the stories in the Gospels and look at them side by side, it's amazing to see the subtle differences between writers based on their perspective and their point of view. Mark put out something different. He said, when Jesus saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. They were following him with no direction. They were just wandering around, just like he found us. I was wandering around with nowhere to go, aimlessly, helpless. They needed a shepherd. Shepherds take care of the sheep by feeding them. They don't let them just go off by themselves. Jesus never overlooks the needs of his people. Anyone who's in his midst always walked away different. This miracle gets a lot of talk because of what he did with the food, and we'll get to that later. But he would have never gotten to the food had he not recognized the need they had first. We live in a society that there's needs all around us. Well, Pastor, what do you mean? I don't have the money to pay for everybody's food. I get that. I'm not asking you to. Well, I can't invite everybody into my home. Some people are crazy. I get that. Be careful. I want you to use wisdom when you're doing something of that nature. Make sure God's helping you give guidance if and when you do things. But I can still see their need. I don't need somebody to hold up a sign and say, here's what I'm worried about. In the Spirit, God can drop that in my heart and say, pray for them because. Speak to them because. Reach out to them because. He sees their need, but he uses us to meet it. Right? God could have done it. He didn't need our help, but he uses us so that we know how he works. Why does God use us like that? Because he wants us to have the same compassion that he does. The disciples didn't have that compassion yet. None of them looked and said, Jesus, we got to feed them. None of them immediately went to Jesus with a solution. They went with a problem. Lord, there's a ton of people here. What are we going to do? I like when somebody comes to me with a solution, even if there is a question. Have an answer. Have a solution. What do you think about it? That lets me know, what are you thinking? How is your heart? What are you concerned about? The disciples were more concerned about, we want to stay with Jesus. We don't want to get separated from him. All these people are following us. And they probably were sitting there going, oh boy, here we go again. There's another multitude. There's another crowd. They're coming in. They're going to take away our time with Jesus. I'm sure the disciples had just a little bit of selfishness to say, we want him by ourselves. Stop following. They wanted to know more about him. They were eager. But Jesus had to remind them, I didn't come just for you. I came to help you meet them. He didn't just come for me. He came to help me meet somebody else. He didn't just come for you. He came for you to meet somebody else. When I walk down the street, it would be nice if I watched a movie years ago. Now, this is fictitious, obviously. But in this movie, Mel Gibson got electrocuted with a hairdryer, and you may know the movie. All of a sudden, he could hear what everybody was thinking. It would be nice if God let me hear what everybody's thinking. Some of y'all have seen the movie. It's pretty funny. But in one part, he gets so bombarded because all the thoughts are coming and it overwhelmed his brain. I can't hear what somebody's thinking, but I can look at them and say, God, how can I help them? He wants us to have compassion. He wants us to meet their needs. He wants us to do what we can. You know, I might not be able to do everything, but I can do something. Meet the needs. He didn't go and just let them fend for themselves. But in that moment, the disciples looked at each other and he said, what do we have? They didn't have jobs. They weren't out there earning money. The disciples left everything to follow Jesus. They were tradesmen. They were fishermen by trade. Matthew was a tax collector. Others were working with their hands. So these were men that knew how to work. They were used to it. So it took some time to adjust to just following him to supply all their needs. But now they were at a moment where he said, what do we have? What can we give them? And so Philip took up a small collection and said, I got a little bit of denarii here, enough for a few people, a little bit of bread. But that's not enough to feed all these people. Then Andrew stepped up and said, hey, Jesus, I found a little boy right here. He's got a little lunch. Some loaves and fish. But it's still a small amount compared to this crowd. Jesus didn't look down on him and say, you know what? Thanks for trying, but that's not enough. What did he say? Bring it to me. Give me what you've got. There's an old song that my dad used to sing. It says, little is much when God is in it. I may not have a lot, but what I have, if I give it to him, he will take it and use it. It may seem insignificant to me. I might be saying, Lord, I'm not a speaker. I don't know how to get up and talk in front of people. I get nervous. But maybe you can write a note of encouragement, put it in the mail, drop it off to him. God can use that just as much as he can somebody speaking from a pulpit. Lord, I may not know how to feed a whole bunch of people, but maybe you can make a cake or a pie or I like sweets. Something that somebody needs and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. God bless you. Doesn't take a lot. He takes what we have. A small amount in God's hands can be multiplied. He took what seemed insignificant. Galilee was at the sea. This area was around water. Everybody knew how to fish. When I was little, I used to wonder why people would park beside the road and go fish off a ditch bank somewhere, off a bridge. I was thinking, can't they go to the ocean? Don't they go out to the coast somewhere and fish? That's what I thought fishing was all about, till I learned sometimes the best fishing is just right off the drop. Get a cane pole. You don't need a whole lot of extra stuff. Just put it in the back of the truck and go find something. In this area, everybody knew how to fish. Everybody had bread. Those were staples. That was like just going down and getting the very basic food. It wasn't a super duper meal. There was no steak. There was no humongous effort. It was just a small amount. Jesus will take what we see as insignificant, and he'll use it and make it something great. I've watched folks who felt like I'm the least, I'm the smallest. No one cares about me. No one's going to remember me. And they'll become a willing vessel, and God will use them in greater ways than they ever thought possible. This multitude looked. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 17 says, we only got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Luke 9 says, Jesus instructed them to give the crowd something to eat, but they responded with doubt. Ooh, sounds like us. He saw the need. He said, hey, disciples, I want to use you to fill it. And they said, how? We can't do that. How many times have we responded to Jesus and said, I don't think so? Because we have that super faith, right? I know God can do anything. Little as much when God is in it. With man, it's impossible. With God, all things are possible. We quote all the scriptures. We know all the stuff to say. But when the rubber meets the road, are we really willing to say, God, I'll trust you without doubt? It's hard because as human beings, we are leaning toward doubt more often than we lean toward faith. Everybody does. It's not no shame in it. It's human beings. We are doubtful people. We are skeptics. We always want to know, how does this work? Is it going to be breaking in 5 minutes? Is it going to last for a long time? We drive by over here and there's a lot of cars on the side of the road at the dealership. You go up there and you meet somebody, you go talk to somebody, you go talk to Kevin about getting a car. Free plug. If you need a car, go see Kevin. Or whoever you're talking to, they're going to let you see all the great things about that car. What they can't tell you is how long it's going to last. What they can't tell you is how expensive the maintenance is going to be. They can show you the bells and whistles. They can let you get a test drive. And sometimes we feel like our faith is that way. We see all the shiny things. We see all the glamorous stuff about worshiping God, about what God can do. But every once in a while we say, God, how does it work? How is this possible? That's where faith comes in. Faith is not me knowing how it's going to work. Faith is believing it'll work no matter what. I don't have to know how. Sometimes my kids ask me, Daddy, why? I say, you don't need to know, just believe me. That's why. That's how. And as their father, I expect them to just trust me. Doesn't God expect the same from us? We're his children. He knows that we're going to have doubts, and he loves us anyway, even when we're doubting, but he uses what we have. Their offering was small, our talents. We talked about it this morning, and I'm trying not to double back on what I said, but it's worth repeating. Everything you've got, God will use. There's nothing that you can't do he won't use in some way. He always does. Jesus took that small little offering. He made it significant. And then he provided in abundance. Notice God didn't do just enough that everybody got some. There were leftovers. When we get ready for Thanksgiving, when we get ready for a big meal at our house, it's hard to cook. When we were just the 2 of us, it was really hard to cook for 2 people, unless you went out to eat a lot. But any meal you cook, it's going to have something left over. I'm the one who likes leftovers for about 2 days, and then after that, it just sits in the refrigerator, and eventually the dog gets a good dinner. I don't like leftovers over and over and over because it doesn't feel the same unless it's pasta. Pasta's better after the second day. But leftovers are part of what we do. We have leftovers. Jesus said, I'll meet your need, not just to the point of your need, but I'll exceed your expectations. He said, you will live a life and have it more abundantly. I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Notice that after he blessed the food and he distributed it out, he said, now go back and pick up what's left over. Earlier, when Philip and Andrew saw the need, they said, well, if we take this and we break it up small enough pieces, everybody will get just a little bit, enough to hold them over. Now, we go on road trips occasionally. We got to take those snacks in the car. Mine's pork rinds. I got to have a big bag of pork rinds up front. The girls complain because they don't smell good, but they taste much better. And sometimes we'll be driving, and I'm the one driving most of the time, and my goal is to get there. I don't like to make a lot of stops. I don't want to pull off the side of the road and see a bunch of stuff. I want to get where I'm going. And invariably, somebody's got to go to the bathroom. Somebody needs to go get some food. And I'll say, hey, just eat this till it holds you over till we get where we're going. God doesn't do that. He doesn't give you just enough to hold you over. He gives you more than enough. In this situation, when Jesus prayed and he blessed it, and they distributed it out, it said that every man got their fill, and they ate all they wanted. And I'm sure in that crowd you had some that wanted a lot and some that wanted a little. There were all different ages. There were all different types of people there. Who knows how much it took? We don't know. It's never recorded how much it turned into. We know what they started with, and we know what they ended with. What's in between is still a mystery, but it was enough to feed 5,000 men, not including women and children. And I'm sure if they were all there, children are going to eat. They're not going to sit there and not have something if you're eating it. Everywhere we go, my kids are saying, hey, that looks good. I want to try some. I don't like to share. I want to eat I ordered it for me. I like it. I'll eat it. If you want it, you get it. But Jesus had enough for everybody. He provided not just for the crowd, but he provided for those that were watching also. He provided abundance. My life is full of abundance. Is yours full of abundance? He doesn't ever leave me lacking. I wake up in the morning and I'm walking in abundance. We talked about it just a little while ago in that song. Your goodness is running after me. All my life, I'm living in the goodness of God. Every day, there's lots of things that happen. I go back and I think about the Old Testament. When the children of Israel were being brought out of Egypt, and they were in the wilderness wondering, how are we going to eat? How are we going to survive? Where are we going to get water, Moses? And Moses, being the preacher, said, okay, let me talk to God about it. He came back with answers. They got water from a rock. They were satisfied. Then they said, well, water's good, but we need to eat something. So they got manna from heaven. And when they got the manna from heaven, it wasn't, here, get all you want. It was, get all that you can eat. But they never ran out. And it didn't go bad. On the sixth day, they got enough for 2 days because the seventh day they weren't going to get any. Jesus meets their needs every single time. And then they got tired of that. Sometimes we get so used to God's blessing, we get tired of it. Let me say that again. We get so accustomed to being blessed that we get tired of it. Not that I don't want it anymore, but I just get so, it just doesn't affect me the same way. And so God said, okay, manna not good enough? He set down birds from heaven. They had fresh meat to eat. God's folks always complain. The children of Israel were the most blessed people in all of history, and sometimes they were the most complaining people in all of history. Sounds like some church folks I've met before. Blessed beyond measure, but can't find anything good about it. You know, I've seen God's miracles happen where they may look and say, you know what? I've not had to be healed. I say, well, that's God's goodness in your health. That's a blessing right there, not to have to go to the doctor. I'm living where I'm not having to be sick. I don't have to go and do all these other things. God's blessings come in different ways. It's abundance. If nothing else, I can look at it and say his grace was more abundant than what I needed. My sin was great, but his grace was greater. Where sin does abound, grace does much more abound. Y'all know that one? Every time I turn around, I am literally looking at God's grace. So I look at his abundance. We live in a country where we have excess of everything. Don't believe me? Go to the store. I know, I'm not old, but I can remember having just a few different selections when I wanted something. Now I'm going to the grocery store, and unless we know specifically what we want, there's about 12 varieties of just cereal or more. It's a lot to pick from. How many different types of white bread can you get? There's a bunch. We live with so many choices because as people, we're not satisfied with just a few. We want a lot of options, even if I don't. I remember very specifically when I was really small, about older than Emma. I mean, older than Eliana, but younger than Emma. We had a TV that had the turn knob on the front. Y'all remember those? Big old tube, had to glow to start to come on. My sister loved to come home in the afternoon and watch soap operas at 3 o'clock, Days of Our Lives, those things like that, Guiding Light. I didn't want to watch it. You only had 3 choices on channels, or 4 maybe, if one of them was kind of fuzzy. I'd go twist it to what I wanted and pull the knob off so she couldn't change the channel. I did, and I'd hide it where she couldn't find it. So the younger we were, it didn't matter. We had what we had. Choices. I don't remember growing up with cable television in the house. We didn't have it. Too many choices, too many options. Now, if I wanted to, I could turn on, there's 500 different channels, not including the ones you pay for extra. Why? Because there's too many choices to look at. And then we complain there's nothing to watch. Too many choices, nothing to watch. Oh, I've seen that before. We're spoiled, folks. We live in a country where we have everything we could ever want, and it's never good enough. I mentioned it earlier. You go down the street. Used to, you'd have 2 or 3 different brands of cars you could pick from. Now there's all kinds. Different colors, different options. But basically, they're the same. I got to go choose, and it takes all day. It's not a process. Sister Jarman hates when I get ready to choose something because I don't make decisions fast. I don't care if it's shoes, clothes, something big like a car. I want to do my due diligence and check everything out, try every option because I want to make sure if I'm buying it, it's going to be good and I'll last. And she says, just pick one. Get done with it. You know it's going to be all good. But we have so many choices. God has blessed us so greatly that we can look and say, God, look at all the blessings I've got. I never want to get tired of seeing his abundance. And as we wrap this up, I want to bring your attention to one more thing. How many folks know that this was not the only time Jesus fed a multitude? This wasn't it. He's fed the 5,000 in this chapter. But if you go to Matthew chapter 15, he fed 4,000. He did the same thing. And they had leftovers too. Different crowd, different situation. But God saw the need. He fed them. And I'll close with this. When God does something in abundance for us, he gives us enough to have leftovers. Why? Because he wants us to give it to somebody else. All those baskets, not boxes, baskets of bread and fish they had left over. Jesus collected them. They kept some for the disciples, but then they had to turn around and give what was left over to the people that they can take it. When God blesses me with something in abundance, he doesn't expect me just to hoard it and hold on to it. He expects me to turn around and say, hey, who needs some? How can I share it? And out of my abundance, I can turn around and let blessings happen to somebody else. This group, when he fed the 4,000, they had 7 baskets left over. Still had a lot. Turn around and give it to somebody else. You see, when God blesses us, he gives us the abundance to prove he's the supplier. I turn around and I very rarely watch the news. But one of the areas in the news that they've talked about for a while is imports and exports, having tariffs. It's going to cost more money because they're going to ask certain countries to pay a certain price. You see, when I have that, it's coming from somewhere else. What I've got comes from somewhere. Very few times am I making it by myself with all my own resources. God supplies that need. He gives me the ability to work. He gives me the ability to live. He gives me the ability to have all the blessings that I've got to turn around and say, look, world, I've got someone meeting my needs. Jesus cares enough for you to make sure that you never run out. His love never runs out. It never goes away. It never stops because He looks at my need. Would you stand with me tonight as we close in prayer? You may not have the same needs as the person beside of you, but the great news is no matter what you're going through, God looks right to that very need and says, I've got what you need, and I can meet it in abundant supply. Would you bow your heads with me? Father, we thank you for this word. Lord, I thank you that you will never run out of abundance, and that when you bless us, when you pour into us, and we come to you and you see our point of need, you look beyond what we may say, you look beyond what we might think, how we feel, what we're going on, what's happening, and you say, here's the very heart of that need. And then you, in your own loving way, you turn around and you find a way to fill it in an unexpected, unimaginable way. And in filling it, you have more than enough left over for me to not only fulfill my needs, but to bless somebody else out of the abundance. Lord, I thank you for that. God, let me never get tired of your blessing. Let me never get weary of having your hand on my life, that I take for granted that God is always supplying what I need. And as the scripture says, my God shall supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus. Lord, I know that in a moment's time it can change. We go through hills and valleys, but never have I seen the righteous forsaken, as David said, nor his seed begging bread. I've always seen you take care of your people. God, and I ask right now that you help me as you have blessed me to turn around and say, I want to be a blessing to someone else in need. God, love through me. Show through me your goodness, and I'll thank you for it in Jesus' name.